Now, let's move to the second mini lecture of Module 5 about the principles in designing materials. First of all, David Noonan's principles in materials design are as following. First, materials should be clearly linked to the curriculum they serve. Specifically, materials should be chosen on the basis of their relevance to the objective and goals of the curriculum. Next, materials should be authentic in terms of text and task. Text authenticity refers to the authenticity of the input data, which are used as a point of departure in materials development. Task authenticity refers to what learners actually do in relation to input data. Next, materials should stimulate interaction as well. Materials should stir interaction among learners. They must cause the conversation among interlocutors for them to negotiate meaning, interpret signs and symbols, or understand dialogues. David Noonan also believes that materials should allow learners to focus on formal aspects of the language. There is evidence that learners can benefit from form-focused activities that require them to solve problems, form and perform hypotheses, come to conclusions, and construct their own rules from instances and examples of language use. Moreover, materials should encourage learners to develop learning skills and skills in learning. Learning skills refer to 4 C's: critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, and collaborating. Meanwhile, skills in learning include speaking, listening, reading, writing, pronunciation, and memorization. What's more, research on learning styles and work in learner-centered curriculum development has led to the trend of incorporation into materials activities that teach students about learning, as it is impossible to teach everything students need to know in class. What's more, according to Noonan, materials should encourage learners to apply their developing skills to the world beyond the classroom. That a good language learner who always looks for opportunities to do must be a part of the materials. Many learners fail to make connection between the language work done in class and the language they encounter outside. Tasks designed to get learners to apply their skills needed to be elaborated. Now, secondly, I'm going to show you Hutchison and Walter's principles of materials design. The principle number 1, good materials provide stimulus to learning and encourage students to learn. They should contain interesting text, enjoyable activities, opportunities for learners to use their existing knowledge and skills, and content that is suitable for the teacher and the learners. Principle number 2 is good materials should help the teaching-learning process. Actually, this should provide a clear and coherent unit structure which will guide teacher and learner through various activities in such a way to maximize the changes of learning. The materials must be clear and systematic, but flexible enough to allow for creativity and variety. Next, materials embody a view of the nature of the language learning. They reflect the writer's thinking and feeling about the learning process. Principle number 4, according to Hutchison and Walter, is that materials reflect the nature of the learning task. Alright, language learning is a complex process involving different kinds and levels of knowledge. the materials should create a balanced outlook, which reflects the complexity of the task and make it appear manageable. Principle number 5. Materials function to broaden the basis of teacher training by introducing teachers to new techniques. Last, materials provide correct models of appropriate language use. Now, let's discuss the third type of principles of Tomlinson's. As you can see, Tomlinson set 16 principles based on second language in general and not context-specific, which suggests that they are universally transferable and applicable to all materials design. According to him, principle number 1 is that materials should achieve impact. Impact is achieved when materials have a noticeable effect on learners. That is when the learner's curiosity, interest, attention are attracted. If this is achieved, there is a better chance that some of the language in the materials will be taken for processing. Principle number 2 is that materials should help learners to feel at ease. Materials can help learners to feel at ease in many ways. For example, text and illustrations rather than just text that the learners can relate with their own culture, rather than those that are culturally bound, materials that include examples rather than without. Next, materials should help learners to develop confidence. Relaxed and self-confident learners learn faster. Many of them feel relaxed and self-confident if they think that the materials they learn are not too difficult, but just one step further or more difficult than they master. Next, what is being taught should be perceived by learners as relevant and useful. Apparently, in ESP, teachers of English can easily select materials that are relevant to the specific choice of topics and tasks that the learners are also learning in their field of study. Therefore, the materials they learn must be relevant and useful. Number 5. Materials should require and facilitate learners' self-investment. Materials that enable the learners to be interested in them, that can draw their attention, and that can attract them to learn the materials, will facilitate them to learn the materials by themselves. The next one. Learners must be ready to acquire the points being taught. To acquire the points being taught, the materials learned should be 1 plus 1, in which 1 presents what has already been learned, and 1 represents what is available for learning. The next principle is materials should expose the learners to language in authentic use. Well, a lot of teaching or learning materials can provide exposure to authentic input through the instructions, advice they give for the activities, and the spoken and the written text included in the materials. The other principle is learners' attention should be drawn to linguistic features of the input. As you can see, these linguistic features should not become the main focus in the materials, but the learners should be made aware that linguistic features are needed to locate and to make a generalization about the function of the linguistic features in the main materials. Besides, materials should provide learners with opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purposes. After learning the materials, Learners should be given opportunities to practice the language they have learned for communication in real-life situations, not just practicing it in the classroom controlled by the teacher. Principle number 10. Tomlinson states that materials should take into account that the positive effects of instruction are usually delayed. As it can be observed in our daily teaching, learners learning a language is not an instantaneous process, but a gradual one. In order to facilitate the gradual process of learning or acquiring a language, it is important to give frequent and sample exposure to the instructed language features in communicative use. Materials should take into account that learners differ in learning styles. Not all learners have the same learning styles. Language learning styles include visual, auditory, kinesthetic, studio, experiential, analytic, global, dependent, and independent. The next, materials should take into account that learners differ in affective attitudes. Learners' attitudes vary in types and times. Ideal learners will need strong and consistent motivation, positive feelings toward the target language, the teachers, the fellow learners, and the materials they are learning. Realizing this fact, materials should provide choices of different types of texts and types of activities. What's more, materials should permit a silent period at the beginning of instruction. The silent period is used to facilitate the development of an effective, internalized grammar and other language elements which can help learners to achieve proficiency. The other possible extension of the principle of permitting silence is to introduce most new language points through activities which initially require comprehension before production. Besides, materials should maximize learning potential by encouraging intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional involvement, which stimulates both right and left brain activities. This principle means that materials which encourages the learners to learn the same lesson involving different cerebral processes and different states of consciousness in many different parts of the brain will maximize recall. Next, materials should not rely too much controlled practice. Most spontaneous performance is attained by doing the practice and automatically is achieved through practice of no evidence. However, many researchers agree that controlled practice appears to have little long-term effect on the accuracy with which new structures are performed and has little effect on fluency. Yet, controlled grammar practice activities still feature significantly in popular coursebooks and are considered useful by many teachers and learners. Now, last but not least, materials should provide opportunities for outcome feedback. Feedback which is focused on the effectiveness of the outcome rather than just on the accuracy of the output can lead to output becoming a profitable source of input. Therefore, a learner who is successful to achieve a particular communicative purpose will gain positive feedback on the effectiveness of the use of the language for further language outcome. In relation to this, materials developer has to be sure that language production activities have intended outcomes other than just practicing language. So, That's the end of the second mini lecture on Module 5. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.